Measuring SEO. This is the topic that we are going to cover today in our session of the Learning SEO Accelerator Program. And to cover it, we have Cyrus Shepard, who is an SEO consultant that I respect so much. He has tons of experience working with all of type of clients, consulting in-house. He's not only the SEO consultant, but also the founder of Zippy. Thank you very much, Cyrus, for joining us today.
Thank you for having me. It's exciting to be here.
Thank you, thank you. And this particular topic, I consider it critical, fundamental, because it might not be the first, let's say, topic that comes to our mind when we start learning SEO, but realistically is key for SEO success, because what we don't measure is impossible to communicate. And we need to be able to communicate what actually matters to decision makers, to our bosses, to get buy-in, to get resources on one hand. And then on the other hand, it's not only for reporting, right? It's to also measure, to also track what should matter to us, right? In order to be able to identify opportunities, identify challenges, what has gone wrong after a Google Core update, like the one that has just happened at the moment, right? So it is fundamental to understand that there are different levels of measurement in SEO. We might want to measure some very specific configurations that we're working on, for example, the crawlability or indexability for our own sake, but these are not necessarily things that we want to communicate to the non-technical decision makers or founders of the company. For this roles, we want to communicate other things like the increase in traffic, conversions, or revenue. That are the things that they will understand and care about, right? So let's talk with this particular topic, Cyrus, because I know that there are already many questions that we want to ask regarding KPIs, key performance indicators. Which are those areas, elements, key performance indicators in general that you tend to measure again and again? And I know that here there is like a big, it depends as usual in SEO, but usually what are the different KPIs that you tend to track, to monitor, to measure in order to identify yourself opportunities and then also to communicate to clients or decision makers?
Yeah. So before I answer that question, I want to put a kind of umbrella comment over this whole conversation. Again, thank you for having me. It makes sense why you invited me to talk today, because I've obviously delivered hundreds of reports, over the course of my career. I've written blog posts on reporting. I've helped, when I was at Moz, I helped make software that literally thousands of people use for reporting, especially the reporting modules. All that said, it's hard, and I don't think I'm that good at it, which is kind of the funny thing. I mean, every time I deliver a report, I'm like, oh, gosh, what should I be reporting here? Also, like a lot of people, I'm terrible at GA4. I suck at GA4. I saw a lot of people submitting questions about that. So there, and I'm with Aleda sitting right here, who's known throughout the world for her SEO report. So I have imposter syndrome. But that said, I think we can have some good conversations about what we're trying to achieve. So let's start with KPIs. This was an interesting question because a client asked me this last month. He's like, "What are you going to report to me at the end of the month?" And I'm like, well, we have to have a conversation. What's important to you? I mean, I'm sitting here talking to you, and I know you really just want to see your traffic go up and to the right. So when we talk about KPIs, I think we put them in 3 or 4 different buckets. One, because we're SEOs, we generally report organic traffic. That's kind of the bedrock of every report that we have generally, and every SEO that I talk to. But then you have your client goals. For this client, it's how many tools they sell. They make concrete tools. Every client has a different number of goals. So you have to have a conversation with your client about their business goals and figure out what their key performance indicators are that they want to track and that are important to the business, because we're going to be tying that in later. And the third bucket that you generally have are very project specific. For example, if I'm working with a large site and they have tens of millions of pages and we're trying to get more indexation, that will be a KPI specific to that project. That it's not, no one at the business cares about the number of index pages, but it's something that we're working on. So it's something that we want to report progress on. So those three buckets, traffic, business goals, and project goals, those are the generally three KPIs that we try to track in any report.
That is amazing. I love, Cyrus, how all the KPIs that you mentioned are KPIs that can be literally obtained through different data sources, if you saw, right?
Yeah.
Like these are type of KPIs that will exist and are there in general, independently of the tool, because I believe that, and this takes us to the next question, right? That some of the main mistakes that I see, unfortunately, making again and again is using, let's say some indicators that are provided by tools that are invented or developed by the tool themselves, that many times we don't even know how they are generated, that we don't understand. However, unfortunately, many times, especially clients that are not so sophisticated and are still trying to understand SEO and see the value, end up fixating on, right? Oh, I remember back in the day, I'm sure that you remember too, because we're that old, right? That when we started doing SEO, do you remember the Google bar with the page rank bar? I was telling the group the other day, right? How when I was starting doing SEO, there was a fixation by clients on seeing if their page rank of the homepage increased or not. And at the end of the day, this was pointless because they wouldn't achieve any more revenue necessarily because of that. What they should focus on was on the increase or improvement of rankings, traffic, revenue, right? But there was this fixation where the bar and eventually Google eliminated. I understand how it can be very useful, and that is why many tools like Moz, Ahrefs, etc., have provided us like with all the metrics to measure the authority or the relevance of the pages and websites. But those should be, let's say, references to measure for us to see if things are improving based on our efforts. But I don't think that necessarily these are the final metrics or KPIs that we should be informing about to decision makers, right? Because they actually care about other things. And then even with other stakeholders collaborating with us in the project, like for example, the technical team, they will want to know if all of the efforts that we have been doing to improving call budget on a massive website, for example, are improving by allowing more pages to get indexed or to get ranked, rather than some crazy rating on callability that a third-party tool give us from 0 to 100, and we don't quite understand how it comes up, right? So I would like to talk about these don'ts, these mistakes, these common issues that you find in the way that we track and we measure things, and what to do instead.
Yeah, so I think you touched on a key problem. One of the mistake of over-reporting numbers that aren't really actionable. I think one thing that's we hear a lot about on social media right now are core web vitals, because Google has a core web vitals report, and it's very easy for clients to go in there and see things, and it may be tempting to report on those numbers. Or at Moz, SEMrush, Ahrefs, these tools just spit out so many numbers with their audits, and I feel bad because I've worked on these audits. I'm part of the problem because I worked at Moz back in the day. But so many of these things, you have a lot of 301s, and you report it to the client, and it's not going to make a difference, and they think you have a problem that you don't. But here's how I like to think of it. You're reporting. If there's one thing I want to take away from this meeting, your reporting needs to tell a story. And if it's not serving the story, it doesn't necessarily have a place in your reporting. So you're not just reporting numbers, because you're trying to your reporting is a reflection of the SEO work that you're doing. So when I do a report, I have 5 steps that I like to go through. First, you lay out the problem. What problem are we trying to address? We're trying to increase index pages. What is the action that we took? So this is a review of the action that we took. We updated our sitemaps. Number 3, what was the result of that action? And the result being this is the meat. This is your KPI. As a result of this action, our index pages rose by 3 million. And then we want to get into the next step. So what challenges are we facing? Why didn't we get index 5 million or whatever? And then next steps. So those 5 things. What was the challenge? What steps did we take? What was the KPI? What are challenges we are facing? And what are next steps? That way, if you're reporting to a CEO or anybody, they see the entire picture and they see where those numbers fit into what you're trying to accomplish. They also give you job security because they see that you have more work to do and they see the rewards of the work that we already put in. So those are the biggest mistakes that I see. Over-reporting irrelevant numbers, but how do you know what's irrelevant? Does it fit into a story that you're trying to tell? And if it does, if you can't tell a story around it, maybe you shouldn't be reporting. That's how I like to approach things.
I love it. I love it. At the end of the day, is what there's something critical. What you mentioned is like the actionability on what we are communicating, right? Will that serve for a purpose? Will that metric allow the decision maker to understand if we are doing well or not? And by all means, if things are not going well, and this is something that I want to clarify right now, it's important to communicate, to report on those, but also to explain the why and to recommend on the next steps to avoid or to change the negative trend in case there's any, right? So this is why it is critical to communicate on a KPI that is actually meaningful, that will be helpful also in order to, as Cyrus mentioned, to tell a story and to get the buy-in that we need to make things happen, to change the trend, especially if it's going, if it is not going as expected, right? There is another thing that I would like to highlight here, because Cyrus, you mentioned, and you did and it's understandable because, of course, we want to measure our SEO progress, to communicate to decision makers, to the people who hire us for the SEO process in the first place, and to show how it is going, but also the other elements that we may want to track ourselves. So I like to specify the difference. Like, we might want to have a dashboard, for example, in the SEO tools that we use on the day-to-day, or even in third-party tools, aggregators. So for example, we might want to use Google Dash in order to be able to configure certain things. But on the other hand, we don't want to necessarily communicate this to our clients or decision makers with just a dashboard, right? That they won't understand, that they won't be able to go through, to navigate. They will need a little presentation, very likely, an executive summary, something that you might even want to write in an email. It doesn't need to be something overcomplicated, right? What are your preferred ways to, on one hand, monitor, track the KPIs that matter to you, and then on the other hand, the best way or format that you have found to communicate those to clients?
Yeah, so you touched on a couple of very good points there. So I talked about my storytelling, but yes, generally there's some sort of dashboard. A lot of clients like to look at data themselves, so you generally link to a dashboard. You have that available both for yourself and the client. But it also shows your work. It shows some of the things that you're doing. You mentioned Looker Studio. I think Looker Studio is amazing for pulling in data and creating custom dashboards for clients. And the customization is really the key because it feels like, hey, they're so easy to build, and they feel like, hey, this is just for me. This is showing the progress. So I'm a big fan of Looker Studio. And if you're just getting started, there's a lot of templates out there that you can Google and pull in to start building your dashboards, especially with GA4 because GA4 is so hard to or confusing to use. Highlighting those things in Looker Studio is a good way to go. I think I'm rambling on. I do that sometimes in these presentations. I'll stop.
No problem at all. That is great indeed. Yeah, using, for example, Looker Studio in order to track, to monitor things, to also putting data together from Google Search Console, GA4 at the same time. Many SEO tools will have connectors too, so you only need to monitor in a single place. That is great. For, let's say, sophisticated SEO savvy clients, I will say it might be handy to what you mentioned, to share the link so they can go and take a look and see how things are going. But there is the risk for non-savvy SEO clients, I think, to go and take a look, and then after a couple of days of a little drop, I have had those situations in the past, then they get a little bit scared, let's say, and let's say it's important to have a little bit of education, evangelization, if you are going to give access to the SEO monitoring tool that you're using to these clients, if they are going to be taking a look at them, because otherwise it will be rather common that they get access, they take a look, and after a couple of days of a little drop, they might get scared quite quickly, and arise all the generate all the issues in the day-to-day and the management and potentially micromanagement, right? Which is also a topic that I want to touch with the next question, right? Because there was a question regarding how often you should track things and take a look at things. And this particular question mentioned about, oh, my client wants me to, an example, to crawl the website every single week or take a look at this metric every single week. But many times, honestly, it doesn't make sense. It doesn't make sense, for example, if you have an example, bi-weekly launches. So why do you want to be tracking things every single week when you don't even launch that often, right? And we know that SEO takes time, unless you are a publication that literally whatever you publish is going to get indexed on the next minute. It is going to take much longer for you to see any impact of whatever you do, right? So, Cyrus, can you please explain how you handle that with clients, how you deal with this, let's say, the need of validating and checking and communicate and get information very frequently, and how often would you suggest for people to do this?
Yeah, so this is a very common situation. Happens with myself. I'm usually the one who likes to check way too often, especially for my own projects. If I launched something yesterday, I am obsessively looking at analytics within a few hours going, did it change engagement? Did it change engagement? But with you can't do that responsibly when you're working with other people, because you things fluctuate so much, traffic fluctuates so much within days and weeks, and you need a significant sample size in order to make changes or make decisions. So that's something I would, if I had a client that was pushing on like that, I would probably push back and say, we need a sample size. We're getting this much traffic. We need statistical significance. You might use a statistical significance calculator to tell the client, when we reach 15,000 visits on this URL, then we can make a decision. Until then, the data is going to be way too noisy, and we're looking at trends over time. So all those reasons, there's a bit of hand holding, but you have to push back and not placate those requests to check the data every few days, because if you do, they're going to want to make changes every few days, and it's just not going to work. So you just have to push back, and that's how you do it.
Yeah, interesting. Then also is about the different levels of data and what to track and what not. And there was a question here regarding views or clicks coming from other countries, other areas, to a service that is local, right?
Yes.
Realistically, this has all to do with the business at the end of the day. So forget 1 minute here about SEO and technical and let's say, sophisticated metrics here and think about, is that visit meaningful for the business? Is your service or your product going to be able to be sold for that audience? So if you are offering a service or a product in the US only, and your reach is only the US, if a visit comes from Australia or South Africa or Argentina or Mexico, for example, and you know that that type of client or that type of user will never become your client, or it doesn't have very likely the chances to become a customer, then it's something that you might want to inform about to your clients. Hey, we are getting tons of visits from this or Y country, so there might be a potential opportunity to start opening up to these other markets. But so this might be something that you might want to inform, like an opportunity, and then you might want to do even an international SEO assessment or keyword research at some point. But what it is important is that you discuss with your client or your company what is the reach of the services, and you focus on tracking and seeing the increase and value on those. Because otherwise, imagine if you're an example, if your reach of business is only the US or only Spain or only Mexico, and then all of a sudden you start ranking very well in Ecuador or in Argentina, but you see this influx of traffic and rankings, and then the same level of conversions, then your conversion rate goes very, very, very into depth. Then it might also not say necessarily a lot about your own SEO services, right? So it's important to, of course, pay attention of all of those type of behaviors and communicate them accordingly, but always taking into account of what is the ultimate goal for that SEO process, right? Is a sale, is a conversion, or even adverts. And this is interesting, right? I have had in the past clients that even make money with adverts, but they only made money with adverts shown to users in English-speaking countries, and they got a lot of traffic. I remember from Brazil, which is a huge market and also a huge opportunity. And I was like, look, there's this huge opportunity here. And they were like, oh, sorry, Aleida, but that is not making money for us, and we don't have a potential advertiser here or network, advertising network that is feasible for us to opt into. So unfortunately, it's not something that we care about necessarily, which was a pity, right? But it's important to communicate. It's important to warn them, because that can be a potential opportunity for them in the future, right? But of course, don't focus on taking those into account in your own metrics. It's important to filter out, to focus per, let's say, a scoop of the location that you are focusing your SEO process on, because otherwise it will be a little bit pointless and you will conflate data and it won't be accurate of the actual results that the client cares about. I don't know if, Cyrus, you want to add anything? Yeah.
Yeah, I was actually impressed by this question, which I think Angel submitted, because so often a beginner SEO will just report, in this case, total clicks to the oncologist. Hey, look, doctor, our clicks are increasing. And it's the more medium to advanced SEO that will say, hey, our clicks are increasing, but they're all overseas and they're not helping you, and this is why our conversion rate is going down. So we're going to focus on traffic in these areas. But that's kind of the difference between good reporting and bad reporting. So I'm impressed that you asked that question, because a lot of people would just report the increase in clicks without diving deeper into those numbers. So just by doing that, I think you're demonstrating, a grasp of the business KPIs that Aleida alluded to. So good job.
Amazing. Yes, I love these questions because it shows real life experiences, and that is the objective of these sessions, to clarify the typical doubts that will arise when you're actually doing SEO, and unfortunately are not usually clarifying guides, right, or resources that are published. Here's another question, right, regarding the budget that we have many times in order to have access to different tools and data sources to measure. And this is something that I have talked about also in the past, that usually the more the merrier, and it's important to at least have a couple of different data sources to validate, at least, even if we know that they are not going to be 100% the same, that they have a similar trend, right? Like what it's not, let's say, reasonable, is that we see one thing, an increasing organic search traffic trend in Google Search Console, and then all of a sudden in Google Analytics is going down, right? So there's something wrong. That there's something that definitely wrong there. Even when measuring, if maybe we are not tagging well the website, etc., right? So we mentioned how at least we want a couple of data sources in order to validate, to confirm that what we're seeing is correct, is accurate. But then also here's like the comment about being limited by budget, right? So how do you navigate that, Cyrus? Do you think that we can only rely on free tools like Google Analytics, Google Search Console? What do you tend to do? What is your mix of tools also to track in general, trying to have a backup always and being on the safe side of things? How do you go with that?
Yeah, so my situation might be a little different. I normally work with existing SEO teams, and the client generally has their own stack, their own analytics stack, and sometimes it's good, sometimes it's bad, sometimes we have to add things to the mix. But here's what I'm looking at today. So I'm a big fan of Google Search Console. So Google Search Console is always my bedrock. It's always the thing that I start with, that I share with clients. I love their API. It's very easy to use, especially with ChatGTP. It's pretty easy to formulate calls to the API. So I always start with Google Search Console. Today, we're in this really weird time when your next source of data is going to be very confused, and that's because of the transition to GA4. Weirdly, every single client I work with, they're Universal Analytics, or they have Analytics 360, the paid Google product. They're all still working. So most of my clients haven't really made the painful transition to working every day in GA4. And it's painful for me. And I suck at GA4. I'm still learning how to try to get the same data out of it. So my clients are all over the place. They have Adobe, they have Matamo, a product called Plausible, because they don't want to make the transition to GA4. So that other source of data, it's a weird learning time for me, trying to get the backup, trying to get that validating source of data, and it's all over the place. Then you have your third-party reporting tools, SEMrush, Ahrefs, Moz, SimilarWeb, whatever you're using, and again, that's client specific. So right now, it's a mishmash of data sources everywhere. But that's why, again, I really like Google Search Console, because it hasn't changed that much. It's kind of it's my source of truth for most things, and it's very flexible. But that's where we am, and that's the state of the industry right now. And it'll be weird to see how things shake out. And one other thing I'm going to say is I have some clients who are refusing to move to GA4. They're just not doing it. They're kind of fed up with Google for whatever reason. And I think we shouldn't assume in the industry, because everybody used GA3, I think there's this assumption by a lot of SEOs that we have to move to GA4. And I think as an SEO consultant, you want those skills, but I don't think we should assume that all our clients are really going to successfully make that transition. I'm not sure what we're going to see in the future, but we need to be open to a lot of different solutions.
100%, I agree. In fact, I have to say something, right? In the past, also because of a few of my clients are also on the enterprise type, they will have Adobe Analytics. And I know that there are other enterprise level or product level solutions that are much more sophisticated and allow you to track at a much more granular level and stuff, and actually configure reports that were even more meaningful and impactful when they were already configured. But you actually needed a analyst team in order to do it so, right? Yeah. So my point with GA4 is not that it was bad per se. No, like the way that it evolved to measure things might even be better and more accurate for the business ultimately. But unfortunately, because how it was released, it felt that you actually needed an analyst in order to configure every little thing, as you already had access by default in the previous Google Analytics, right? I think that, for example, Dana DiTomaso and Krista Seiden, they have done a fantastic job sharing free resources and guides on how to configure, for example, the landing page report that we used to have in Universal Analytics by default, how to recreate it in GA4. And it's almost there, and we almost have the same tracking, but yes, we need to configure it from scratch, step by step. It's not something that is provided by us from scratch, right? So I 100% agree. And what I will add here is that ultimately what it is important is that whatever tool we use is a tool that the client or decision maker trusts, and they agree that we use and report with, because at the end of the day, what we want is their support and buy-in. And if we end up using something that they don't necessarily trust, and they will be double questioning all the time, we don't want to be in that position if we can avoid it, especially if it is a decision that we have made ourselves, right? So please make sure to understand what is the current stack, the analytics stack of the organization, if they already have something, if there's a bias on certain type of tools from the decision maker, what they like, what they prefer, etc., to align ourselves to what they already trust to. That I would say that just like a little bit of a warning there, because ultimately what they want is that they are not double questioning us every single time that we communicate something or report on something.
Yeah, and so I'll just add that when I was at Moz, our primary stacks were Adobe and Google Analytics, and as the marketing person in house, we probably had 30 people that wanted access to the analytics, whether they're the product team or the marketing team, and there were probably 2 or 3 of us that were the core analytics people in the company, and we would have training once a month. What are how to use these products, how to use it. How to build reports in Adobe. And you may want to be that person for your client or your in-house team. And it's an incredible skill to have if you can be that expert that people can go to. Most of the time, today in my consulting, I'm more the dashboard person, where I'm not deeply sharing the analytics. You're just showing the dashboard that people can come to you for. But you can make it a very valuable skill if you want to dive deep and take those courses that Dana T. Damaso or others are offering right now and become the GA4 product expert. That's a very valuable skill that makes you very retainable. And it's something that I've been kind of guilty of not diving into very much. But yeah, it's great to have those people on your team.
100%. Then there's this other questions. I think that is interesting, connected very much with a little bit what is provided to us by Google by default. And 100% agree about being the ultimate source of truth at the end of the day, because it comes from Google, right? The Google Search Console. It's always a tool that I also have, as you mentioned, as a backup, let's say, final layer of information there to validate or double check whatever Run Tracker would tell me, or analytics or whatever. There's Google Search Console there to double check on anything, right? But it's also true that there are these emerging trends and changes in the SEO landscape, as this question mentions. And I will go and say that, for example, the ability to track search features and the visibility and share of visibility, let's say, of your page with the search results has become much more needed than before, because of the traffic erosion that many search features and the position 0 results and feature snippets, and now ultimately in the future the SGE snapshots that eventually Google will likely release, right, will end up getting, right? So being position 1, first to rank, is not enough to understand the click-through rate that you can expect from results anymore, right? I am using also third-party run tracking tools. So for example, Advanced Web Ranking, they will also very handy provide you the share of visibility, how far in pixels you are from the top. So even if you continue being in first position, then you all of a sudden understand that there's a big ad above, and then there's also this additional backpack that Google decided to start showing because they all of a sudden identified this query to have a localized type of intent. And then all of a sudden your click-through rate has dropped from 30% to 15%, right? And it's not because you have done nothing wrong. It's just because of how some features evolve, right? So how do you handle this? What will be the recommendation for you to try to navigate through this, right? Unfortunately, I wish in my case that Google Search Console will start providing this because they are the source of truth, right? Much more detail and granular information regarding some features and the visibility that your results end up getting in their search result pages, right? Because that will explain many times beyond the position, the click-through rate behavior that you tend to see.
Yeah, I'll probably throw this question back at you, Aleda. I use share of voice is one of those metrics that is probably so valuable to add to your core metrics when you have access to good data. So I used to work with this tool called Stat, GetStat, owned by Moz. It's actually a really, really good tool for calculating share of voice because it takes all those SERP features into account. It takes your competitors into account, and it can calculate with a fair degree of accuracy your actual organic visibility, even if you rank number 2, but there's a huge video and ads above everything, and you're only expected to get a 1% click-through rate on your number 1 ranking. That's something that your client wants to know. Unfortunately, all the major tools, SEMrush, Ahrefs, they'll show you the SERPs, but I'm not sure what the great solution today is for easily calculating those share of voice metrics. And I'm going to throw this back to you, Aleda. What would you recommend people do to start calculating this?
Unfortunately, the way that it is doable right now is with these tools, rank tracking tools that are actually providing this information. So for example, Advanced Web Ranking provide this too, also with a market share evolution over time. And also they allows, and this is very, very handy, especially when understanding the impact of core updates, when things will tend to shift much more, right? A much more meaningful way. What is shown above default. And because literally many times it's not because the position has changed. It continues to be the second position, and you don't see a huge new ad above, or you don't see like a knowledge panel of the sudden or a big change. But then you realize that below the first position, there is now people also ask carousel all of a sudden. It was that. So it's very, very tricky. So you need a tool that you can rely that will track all these type of new search features, and so they are proactive identifying every single one of them, and there's so many nowadays. So thankfully, I believe that there are certain run trackers, but yes, there are paid run trackers. I wish that the Google Search Console would be better on informing on this. And then of course, this type of, let's say, measurement, very granular measurement, requires a little bit of more, not only budget, but sophistication and more understanding by the decision makers. It's like, because they need to be able to be sensible enough and open enough to be educated on this. If at some point there is a very, very important drop in rankings or click-through rates or visibility share, whatever level, without this from happening. So I have a funny anecdote on this, that an important brand that was my client all of a sudden dropping in click-through rate and clicks coming from their branded positions. So it was like, what is going on here? Like, they are still in first position for all of the branded queries, and it was the paid team has started to run very big adverts at the top to achieve their own goals, and they hadn't alerted the organic team. These things happen, and that is why it's important to be paying attention visually what's going on. So my recommendation here, even if you don't have the sophisticated run tracking tools, that at least you have certain tools that allow you to take snapshots from time to time of the SERPs for your different type of key queries, so you can keep an eye on how they are displayed, not necessarily on the position itself, but how they are and the anatomy of the SERP and the visibility that they have within the SERPs.
Yeah, I have one thing to add to that, and this is probably one of my best tips. One of my favorite things to do with a client, usually at the first or second meeting, I like to sit down and we pick one of their top keywords, from Google Search Console or Rank Tracker, and we open up a big screen in front of everybody and we Google that keyword and we walk people through the actual SERP, and we're like, okay, I'm a customer, I'm looking to buy this, and here's the SERP, and here's all your competition, and here are the reasons why I'm going to click your result or I'm not going to click your result. And when you do that, the client often gets very interested because they see the result. They're like, oh, my title is bad, or oh, I don't have a video snippet like everybody else, or oh, wow, I'm ranking third, but this really isn't the best positioning for me based on all these other things. And they really get invested in changing that appearance and trying to move up or down or change the search. So yeah, I love doing a Google walkthrough, even more than just sharing a screenshot or report, because it really gets people into the moment. And it's something I didn't do until later in my career. I wish I would have done it earlier in my career because it really connects people.
Love it, because it's a tip that I believe that we can all do relatively easy. We don't need any tools for that, but it will help to understand the gap and the why of we don't have a better click-through rate. If all of the players, also in e-commerce, since I work a lot in e-commerce, the lack of the image thumbnails and in PLPs, in listings. Oh, it's because you over rely on client-side rendering or JavaScript client-side rendering for your images, and Google is not able to see them. Surprise, surprise. So these little things will allow you to identify opportunities of things that actually matter and will have an impact, not necessarily in the position itself or improve the position, but improving the visibility of how your results are shown in search results and get people to click too. That for sure. So thank you very much, Cyrus. I know that we are getting into the time. I really appreciate the opportunity to talk to you. To wrap up, I don't know if there's any last tip that you want to share with the group today, something that you haven't mentioned potentially before that you would like and you think that will be useful about this topic.
No, I was thinking about this question of how often should we report, and one thing I didn't mention is that sometimes you have to communicate to the client, manage expectations about how long things take. For example, link building. Link building is going to take longer to report on than almost any other thing in your stack. Sometimes months to see results. So I think it's important to communicate those expectations up front, like we're going to implement these changes. Hopefully within 2 months down the line, we will see an impact of this, whether it's fixing technical issues or whatnot, and then we will reevaluate and see. But setting those expectations up front is really important. That's the only thing I wanted to add at the end. I can't believe this went by so fast.
No, thank you very much. They say that time passes very fast when you're having fun, right? And it has definitely been like this for me, for sure. So I really appreciate all of the insights, all of the tips, the ideas for the group. They have been super valuable. I really appreciate it. If you haven't yet followed Cyrus, you know now that you should be following him, of course. So go and do that for sure. And thank you again, Cyrus, for sharing so many insights with us. With this, we are going to wrap up on today's Learning SEO session, and very looking forward to see you in the next one. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.